will the executive be allowed to effectively wield his power if that executive is a conservative? Right. And that's what we're all talking about here. So why is it that 10 years after President Trump comes down the escalator, we're still talking about the deportation? And for a variety of reasons. You have the intelligence community, you have the judiciary, they're just not allowing it. And so, yes, we are, because what I think is finally being done now is the executive is getting its feet back under it and understanding. And this is something that the vice president understands, is something the president obviously has shown all of us through his actions and his words, is that the only way that you can win is by wielding power.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim. I am the CEO of American Moment, and I'm very glad to have you back with us this week. It's a very important episode. This is episode number 200. So if you remember some of our earlier, landmark episodes, for episode 50, we had the one, the only Stephen K. Bannon. For episode 100, we had then Senator, now Vice President, J.D. Vance. And then for episode 150, I think Sarab and I just kind of forgot about it. And so we didn't do anything special for that one. But for episode 200, we have brought in the one and the only Jack Posobiec to come and join us for this episode today. We had a great conversations about many things, including the big, beautiful bill, parts of the conservative movement that have not been supporting the president, what to do about it, and so on. So without much further delay, we will go now to Jack Posobiec. Jack, thanks so much for coming on to episode number 200, Moment of Truth. Welcome.
Wow, 200. And they said it couldn't be done. They said you guys wouldn't make it past episode 2, but here we are.
Here we are. I'm actually amazed we made it past episode 2, but alas, here we are. So everyone on X.com is aware of you. I'm sure you drive a lot of narratives in the public policy discussion.
I don't write those. There's a kid. He does it. I just kind of, it's like whatever. Like, I don't really work that hard. I don't do much.
But I feel like not actually a lot of people know your backstory. So
okay.
Tell us about yourself, your background, where you grew up.
Yeah. All right. Sure. Yeah. No, that's take a step back here. Walk down memory lane. It's funny because my mom has actually been going through, and she's really good on this, because my dad, maybe it's genetics, but he was always big on filming stuff when we were kids. So we've got a lot of those VHS tapes, and he would always have the camcorder. That's what there was in those days. A big camcorder would be up at every family function, or even just random stuff. So she found this new website that takes those and digitizes them. So beyond putting them on CDs, now it's it's just boom, and there's a link to it. And I was saying we should set up like a family YouTube page or something. It's just private, but stuff for us. Yeah. And I'm looking at it, and it's great because you can send the links to everybody in the family chat, and it's awesome. And so grew up in just outside of Philadelphia in a small town called Norristown. It was sort of post-industrial, even as I was growing up, and the town had been sort of going for it was lurching into the slump that it's in now. Now it's like a crime-ridden hellhole, filled with drug addicts, Section 8, illegal aliens. It was actually one of the first towns that in at least Pennsylvania that they didn't call them sanctuary cities back then. It was like 2002, and they voted to allow it. It was very much like the essentials of it. So one of the building blocks was the town council voted to allow Mexican IDs to be used for public services in the town. And this is 2002.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Is this like a super liberal place, like on its face, or?
I mean, yes and no, right? Like it was just sort of a town where people started moving out because all the factories closed down. They're it's right on the Schuylkill River. So it used to be a place where there were factories and there were some industries, and then that would, you'd load stuff onto the boats, and the boats would go down to Philadelphia, and they'd go from there to the wider market. And that all just sort of dried up. All that working class, all those factories just sort of shut down. And, there's a steel plant that used to be on the way to Conshohocken, and that's sort of, it's there, but it's like very reduced from what it was. And so, I grew up in 80s, 90s. And what's amazing to me, and as I think of America now, is I had a taste of, and this is what has ruined me, because I had a taste of what life was like before.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, there was nothing special about it, right? There was nothing special, but it was special because it wasn't like here's what I mean by that. It wasn't the greatest town in the world. It wasn't the, nobody's gonna be like writing stories about it. Maniac McGee was set there. That's like the one story that it's like a young adult novel that was set there. But it was just good, and it was a good town, and it was a town where the kids who I grew up with were the sons and daughters of the kids that my father grew up with. And I remember recently my son now, he broke his arm recently, got in a fight with the monkey bars. Monkey bars won, but he's
They
going.
always do.
They always do, but he's going back. He's resilient. Yeah, and the nurses told us they were like monkey bars and trampolines. Those are the two. But he's good. He's good. It was just like a minor thing. He had to cast for a couple of weeks. And he's back in the pool already. And my dad had said, this happened. The same thing happened to me when I was 9 years old. And he was able to dig up some super old picture from like the 1960s of my father on sitting on a table. And it was, so my father, the house that he grew up in is the same house that I grew up in, because that's how it was. And his mother sold that house to my father. And so our house was the same house that my dad and his sisters grew up in, and his parents lived in, and built in 1900. And again, like just, like a regular, like track housing kind of thing, Norristown, Pennsylvania. But it was well maintained. It was well taken care of. The woodworking was incredible. It actually, believe it or not, had stained glass sliding doors and windows inside the home. And this was a normal working class home at the turn of the century, the previous turn of the century in 1900. And all of that was considered, in terms of the standard of living, this was all normal. This was the complete norm for worker housing, essentially, in those days. And anyway, in this picture, my father's sitting next to another kid, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that's Bill Schrack." And I said, "Bill Schrack?" So, "Oh, you mean Mr. Schrack, right?" Because that guy was still living on the same street all those years later, and I knew his kid. I said, "Oh yeah." So again, it was just a community, a real, actual, living, breathing community. Working class, so Irish, Polish, Italian. That's pretty much the makeup of the town. A couple of churches. There was like the Italian church over here. There was the Irish church, and then there's like St. Paul's, and St. Paul's is just like everybody else. And then we were Polish, so we had to kind of like figure it out. We did end up going to the Irish church, and and you could ride your bike everywhere, and you've got your city hall, you've got your fire station, your church, school is right over here. It was just like that. It was just a town that was like that. And so much of the Northeast used to be like this. And then all of a sudden, it just started bit by bit changing over time, where suddenly, the workplaces get shut down, and suddenly the jobs go away. And so what did the city leaders say we have to do to fix this? Oh, well, we've got to bring in government programs, and we've got to bring in HUD, and we've got to bring in Section 8, and no, I didn't know any of this when I was a kid, but I can remember
it all start to get worse.
Well, I remember realizing that I'm trying to learn how to ride my bike in the back alley, and my parents saying, "Hey, you can't go by that house anymore because that's where the Jamaican drug dealers have their Rottweilers." And the Rottweilers would be like screaming, barking at us, and then the cops would be over there, and they'd arrest the drug dealers, and the drug dealers would get out, and they would come back. And we used to have a library that was, kind of down the street from us, a couple blocks, and I could walk to that library, which is great. You could just, I was like, "What do you mean? I can have books for free?" What a scam. Does anyone know about this? This is incredible. And then I said, "How long can I have a book?" And they said, "For a month." And I was like, "So what you're saying is, if I can optimize," this is me at like 5 years old or whatever, "I can optimize this by taking out as many books as I can possibly read in 1 month." Like I thought that's what you had to do. So I would bring my wagon, and I would just like load it with books and then walk back to my house with it. And we would do that, and usually my mom would come. And as I got a little bit older, she started letting me go by myself. But then she didn't let me go by myself anymore, because the homeless people started going in there and stabbing each other. And and it was like don't go to the library anymore. And it's like, I just want to read books. And, but eventually it becomes this place for vagrants and homeless, and crime and violence comes back up again. So now, as it sits today, that town, we also had the hospital. So the hospital where I was born was like catty corner to where I lived. And I mentioned about the Mexican consular visas being allowed, which basically means like, if you're an illegal alien, come on in, right? And there are studies, actually, I've gone back and looked at this because it's very personal, where I've seen that, okay, this was one of the very first places in the Philadelphia area that was so accommodating towards illegals, even more than the city of Philadelphia itself. And I actually wrote an op-ed, that must have been like, 18, 19, to the local paper saying, hey, if you do this, they're going to overwhelm the healthcare system, and we're going to lose our hospitals because they're just going to use that for free, and they're allowed to because of the way the laws are set up in this country, and we're going to lose our hospitals. And of course, the flood of response letters saying, oh, that guy's a racist. Why would you publish that? Why would you do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they did, which is cool. Times Herald. And long story short, that hospital has been demolished. The hospital where I was born, where my father was born, has now been demolished. The church where I was baptized, where my father was baptized, where my grandfather was baptized, it's in arrears right now. The community is completely changed over, and they're just not able to take care of it to the level they used to in the past. And right next to that hospital, that lot, or again, where like I was born, my father was born, is a Planned Parenthood clinic. So
Wow.
that's the town now. So that's going through an experience like that, and I'm able to vocalize it better than obviously I could when I was little. I couldn't understand why my mom and dad were moving us, because I'm in my mind, it's, hey, we have this great town, we have so many friends, we know everybody. Why are we leaving? And now I get it. They did it because they love me and my brother, and they wanted us to get out, and we had to, before something bad happens to us. And yeah, you can call it white flight, or you can call it gentrification, or not gentrification, but you can call it a number of things. But for us, it was, we just lost our home.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, what is success? How do you define success? And if you're like, oh, how many these days, like, how many followers do you have, and how many retweets did you get? And I'm like, in the back of my head, I've always just kind of defined success as living in a better part of the same town.
Yeah.
But I would still just want to have my town back. And, I was doing an interview once, and we got into all this, and I said, they said, well, what would you take? And I said, dude, I would trade all my followers and whatever if I could just have my town back.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that I've ever wanted. So yeah, I've done more, since then. I went to college. I joined the Navy, lived in China for a couple of years. But if you want to ask me in terms of my background, what drives me, it's really that.
Yeah. How did you first meet Steve Bannon?
Steve. So I first met Steve, I guess, 2017, and I led a series of rallies outside of the White House that I called the Keep Bannon rallies.
Dude.
And we
hell
set
yeah.
we set up we set up
awesome.
we set up keepbannon.com at the time, and I'm down there with my fiance, my now wife, but I'm trying to think of the timing. Yeah, we weren't married at the time, but we had been engaged. So me, Tanya Tay, were down there. We had our dog with us because we didn't have kids yet,
Yeah.
And
you didn't even know him at this point. You set up
I hadn't met him.
a rally.
No, I hadn't met him. No, I hadn't met him yet.
Oh.
And we just realized that myself and a lot of people who had gotten involved in 2016 realized that this was a guy who just saw things the way we did. And he saw how much we were losing in our country. And this movement was such a vehicle for populist nationalism to be able to restore that country that we're all fighting for. And so I led this series of rallies. Obviously, people know the history. And then not too long after, I think it was actually the week after Tanya and I got married, which is funny because I just remember it that way. So November of 2017, we happened to be at an event in New York together, and that's when we first met. And he was like, I remember him saying this. He goes, "Aren't you that guy that ran all those weird rallies for me?" And I was like, "I don't even know you." I was like, I liked what she had to say.
Yeah, I just thought you were cool. I thought we should save you.
And so just kind of just sort of got to know him since then. I could still remember, and I can still remember it was, a couple years later, it was early 2020. And he goes, and Raheem Kassam was, involved as well. And he said, I think we're talking about starting a podcast. A podcast? What do you mean? That's a podcast. He said, yeah, we need a China guy. He knows some China stuff. I was like, yeah, I know some China stuff. And, I was like, I did speak Mandarin in the Navy and all that. And so, we need you there 8 a.m. on a Saturday. I said, okay, well, I'll be in. Man, I wonder if anyone's going to listen to that thing. And then that ended up becoming the War Room.
Yeah. Which, by the way, my mother-in-law watches every day. So she was very excited I was doing this with you.
Oh, that's cool.
And she was watching it. That was how I first found out about it. I was dating my now wife in 2020. And my mother-in-law was watching it every day.
Well, what we found is that people, it's become appointment viewing and appointment listening, and people who really do listen, it's not like the passive cable media kind of, dichotomy or kind of paradigm where people are, it's on in the background and you're sort of looking at the headline and you see the headline and you just go back to whatever you were doing during the day. With War Room, it's you're locked in and you're listening to everything and you're following the memes and you're listening to the jokes and all the back and forth stuff that goes on. And people typically listen. Steve does 4 hours a day every weekday. A lot of Red Bulls.
Yeah.
Which we've been working on. We try to switch him to sugar free, maybe the monk fruit.
Yeah, you gotta give him the monk fruit.
The monk fruit, but
I'll deliver a case myself.
He's just such a creature of habit, though, and he's like, I like the regular because in his mind, right? So in his mind, the regulars are full strength,
right?
So he's like, if I'm getting something else, well, that's lesser. I want the full strength.
Yeah.
So
we'll get him.
We've tried to like work in the sugar freeze, but it never goes well.
Never takes.
Never takes.
Well, yeah, we were talking about, before we were recording that a year ago today and this week, there were a lot of big momentous events happening, specifically today.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a year ago today that Steve went to prison. It was also a year ago today that your book came out, right?
So the book, it's like around that time, yeah. So Steve goes to jail. Unhumans comes out, where Steve wrote the foreword to it, which was our book that it was an anti-communism book, but written from the perspective of this isn't, just history. This is current affairs.
Yeah.
that all of these things that have happened before are happening right now. And we predicted, we said, you're going to see massive uprisings and upheavals of the populist left, where they're going to say, we want to go after the CEOs, we want to go after the rich, we want to go after the landlords, we want to go after all of the means of production. And if they don't get their way, we're going to see political assassination. So Steve goes to jail. The book drops. Actually, right before the book dropped, funny as amazing as he is, Steve went and signed a couple hundred copies of it for us as a special token and a special edition that we did. And so he did write the foreword to the book, and it is a War Room book. And we called it the Political Prisoner Edition. So you could get and I will admit, I have a couple of those stashed away for my own personal collection. Oh, yeah.
Those are going to be worth a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, beyond that, just something I want to have for the family. And, we got like a shadow box. And
it's like giving your boys a shotgun,
Yeah.
This is the hard stuff right here.
And then they call him Uncle Steve. The boys, they see Steve all the time. And then, so then a couple of days after that, Trump gets shot as Steve is in prison. And then 2 days later or something, JD Vance gets picked as the VP nominee. So, I mean,
and the assassination attempt happened around the same time, right?
Right. So book comes out, Steve goes to jail. Then that weekend is the weekend Trump got shot.
Yeah.
On July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. I wrote another book about that too, actually, because I just had to. And then so that's a Saturday, and then the Monday is the day that JD gets picked.
Yeah.
So the Monday after the Saturday, so people forget all this, that a year ago, and by the way, 1 week prior to all that was when Joe Biden collapsed on the debate stage in front of everyone. And so all of this happens in a 2-week period in the summer of 2024. And it's weird how summer of 24 hasn't really become a meme yet, but it really should, because it's just something where if we had like a serious media or serious journalist or anything like that, I mean, there would be documentaries about this. There would be examination of where America was. America, you've got huge figures becoming political prisoners. You've got Peter Navarro, by the way, also became a political prisoner, although he's back in the White House. So I was joking. Peter's following the Eastern European model, Dr. Navarro. So it's like he's the president's, the chief economic advisor. Then he gets sent to prison. Now he's back as an economic advisor. I'm like, you're in line to be deputy prime minister.
Yeah.
This is in Eastern Europe. This is actually quite normal. And my wife being from there, she said, oh yeah, that's I've seen this all the time. It's just different for us because we don't usually see this before. It's like, oh, he's the number one podcaster. Then he gets sent to jail. Now he's back. Now he's having, meetings at the White House discussing, war and peace policies.
Yeah.
And he comes back in. And actually, I'll say this about Steve. And I mentioned about my son that my older son, Jack is. So fast forward 4 months later, Steve gets out, and just kind of a personal story about Steve that, and he won't want to tell it, that day gets out. So he gets out at 3 a.m. So he's up, and I don't know if he's awake. And he always keeps kind of weird, like he does sort of the Da Vinci sleeping thing where you only sleep in chunks.
Yeah, I get texts from him at very odd hours.
Yeah. So okay, you're in the early. Yeah, that means you're in. If you're on his early hours text list, you're pretty well in there. And that's how he is. And so taking my son to school early, it's like 7 a.m. And I said, hey, good news, Uncle Steve got out of prison. And it's just wild to me. My son at the time was 6 years old. He's 6 years old. He knows a political prisoner.
Yeah. And
I told him the truth. I said Joe Biden threw him in prison.
Yeah.
And it's very clear. He's like, why would he do that? Because he hates him and he hates Trump. And that's all it comes down to. And a 6-year-old can understand. They say, I don't like Biden. I don't like him either.
Yeah.
And I said, so Uncle Steve got out, and it's amazing. And then he goes, can we call him? And I said, he's like,
he's probably really busy.
He's like getting out or asleep, it's 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And, obviously he was with his daughter, with Maureen. And I said, you know what? I was like, whatever, I'll play. I said, you know what? I'll go in and fine, I'll try to call him. Yeah. And true to form, Steve Bannon, he gets out of jail, 7 a.m, takes the call.
Yeah.
He goes, hey, how you doing? What's up? What's going on? He picks up the call. Actually, he goes, this is the way Steve almost always answers the phone. He goes, are we winning? To this day, that's how he always answers the phone. I said, I think we're winning because we got you out. Obviously, the election was a couple of days. It was 4 days before the election. Yeah. And I said, yes, Steve, yeah, we are. And, I'm glad to have you back in the fight. And actually, someone special wanted to say hi. And he goes, oh, is it Tanya? I said, no, it's not. It's my son. And he goes, all right, put him on. And he took the call from my 6-year-old son on the morning that he got out of prison, which, it doesn't mean anything to the world or politics or anything. And I just thought about it at that moment. Man, these people have no idea who we are.
Yeah.
In terms of the movement, in terms of just it, friendship and family and having those bonds. And they have no clue what actually drives the America First movement. And they think, they'll sit there and say, oh, you're xenophobes and you're racists and you're reprobates and, the whole litany, the parade of horribles. And it's like, no, we just care. We care about each other. We care about our country. And Uncle Steve and Papa Jack, right? We want a family and a community and a country that's going to be worth giving those kids.
Yeah.
And worth handing off to them, and not a country that's saddled with all this insanity that doesn't look or sound or smell or feel like the country that we grew up in. And it's really that simple. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. In fact, it's like the most common average thought in the whole world. And if it were happening in Japan, if it were happening in India or wherever it was happening, people would point out exactly what it was. But for some reason, here in the United States of America, when we say, hey, our country is becoming something that it wasn't before, and yes, mass immigration is a huge driver of this, suddenly, big trouble.
Yeah. Speaking of people who don't value family and love mass immigration, let's talk about Elon.
Okay. Oh, no.
So
I walked right into it, folks.
what the hell is going on? Like he's back at it again. This episode is going to come out on Monday. We're recording this on Tuesday, so a lot may happen, in between now and then. But it seems like already this morning he's on another tirade against the president, against the big beautiful bill. What actually motivates this guy?
Could be a big beautiful law by the time this comes out.
That's true. God willing. God willing.
Inshallah. Deo Valente. But no. I think what's my personal sense of it, just reading some of Elon's tweets about like budget and deficit and the money, which is really what he keeps focusing on. And and I happened to catch Bannon this morning, and obviously people have seen their feud, and he pointed out that there was a huge loss for the AI crowd in this most recent iteration of debates, 99-1 with this Marsha Blackburn amendment, saying that states can be allowed to regulate AI same way that they regulate corporations and all the rest of it, but was something that the AI crowd, like the tech bro crowd, had really, really been lobbying against because they want unfiltered, unregulated AI for everything. And well, that's
why is that
happen now? Why is that? Because that's gonna win. I mean, people who use Google now are in the slow lane.
I guess I'm old.
ChatGPT, and which honestly, right now, ChatGPT is better than Grok. That could change, but it's just head and shoulders above Google, because Google, right? This will change, of course, as money gets involved. But Google, you go to Google and it's like you type in, hey, I'm just trying to search some fact. And whatever it is, you're going to get hit with like 10 links of ads. Then you're going to get ranked links that get sent to you. And you're just trying to find an answer to your question or try to find some detail, and you can't get there. You go to ChatGPT, boom, answer's right there.
Yeah.
And it spits it out, and the ads don't come in, and the all the superfluous nonsense is gone. And you can even drill down and make it more specific. And I use this, if you're trying to look up statistics, you're trying to look up different things, you can really refine things out, make a graph, make up whatever you want. You can just do that so quickly. Then with Grok, actually what I use Grok for more than anything else is as a Twitter search engine. So if I want to see something and I know that it's been out on Twitter or even social media writ large, I'll go to Grok, because I found that what Grok is better at doing is searching social media, because that's exactly how it's tied. And so it has the ability to track everything that anyone is saying about whatever thing you're interested in. And you could use this for, obviously in politics or current events, there's quite a bit, did we bomb Iran? Did Israel bomb, this site or Isfahan, whatever, and maybe you'll find somebody in Isfahan who's tweeting about it, like there was a guy in Abbottabad who tweeted out the bin Laden raid in real time back in 2011. And I've always said that's one of the seminal moments of social media. The problem was he didn't know what it was, and nobody knew how to connect it until, hey, there's some helicopters flew over my house. But I did think there was a guy who said after the B-2s flew out of Whitehead in Missouri, there's a guy said, hey, a bunch of B-2s just took off.
Yeah, so I did see that.
So someone did tweet that out. So it's like, wow, you have this covert operation getting blown by social media, but that's a power in and of itself. And so the reason that the AI oligarchs or the broligarchs, I guess is the term, they want it unfiltered and unregulated is because they realize that's going to be so much more powerful than anything Google ever did.
Right.
So much, and in fact, it already is. And the more they refine that, the more inputs they get to that, the more accesses they have, it's going to be that much more powerful. Also, though, this comes up. So Elon had a tweet at one point regarding copyright, and he was saying that copyright protection shouldn't extend to LLMs. And so this is a huge problem that they have, because they need to properly construct an AI, large language model, because they're not really AI, they're large language models. To properly do that, you need to be constantly feeding it data and constantly feeding it text. And then it's an algorithm of, which word is closest to this word. And then like, that's how you can use it to create something that seems like a reasonable facsimile of talking to another human being. But the problem is, what if you start feeding it copyrighted material? I
mean, isn't that just like stealing?
Correct. And especially if you're selling what's on the other end, right? Yeah. So if you start feeding it books and movies and scripts and newspapers and news articles and even news archives and any type of content that's copyrighted like that, then all of a sudden you get into issues. So this is why, for example, Disney, famously litigious, is now suing Midjourney, because Midjourney, and this is going to be the first of a series of these lawsuits, because Disney's saying, hey, wait a minute, you're making Mickey Mouse pictures and Homer Simpson, which Disney now owns, right? Because they got 20th Century Fox.
Yeah.
And so you're making all these pictures, you're violating our copyright, you're violating our IP. And so you're going to, down the line, you're going to have this huge fight, and which has kind of already started, between IP and AI. So the fight's going to be between IP and AI, and you're talking potentially billions, trillions of dollars on the line here. And that's why they wanted it in the bill so bad.
Yeah.
And so of course, he's upset about that. Trump mentions the EV mandate, but with Elon, he seems more focused on the budget, the deficit, et cetera. And it's like, man, it's like his political awakening, in a sense. It's like he's made it. So he's gone from sort of the Obama era, and he's moved away from like Solyndra to now he's at like 2012. But 2012, that's Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney. I mean, these guys who they couldn't even win their home states. Couldn't even win their home states. Remember Mitt Romney is originally from Michigan, where his father was the governor. So you'd think that you would know something. And then so Michigan, Wisconsin, you'd think that they would understand just a little bit about how the working class, especially in those areas, actually votes. And they absolutely slaughtered in the Rust Belt, non-competitive. And the Republican Party, as of the 2012 election, they were doing these autopsies and saying, oh, we have to become like the amnesty party. And it was relegated to a regional force. It was a regional party in the United States until 2016 happened, or really 2015. Yeah. And then, so it's like, you have to just turn that dial just a little bit more and understand, yes, these are issues, but they are completely politically non-viable issues. Yeah. And you will get destroyed, and the Democrats will sit there and just say, you're taking away everything, and you will lose. You'll just completely lose, because there's no constituency for it, no matter how much money you throw at it.
Yeah, it does not matter that you are, the richest man in the world, or whatever. There is no political constituency for libertarianism.
No,
frankly.
No, I actually have. I should show you that. Well, I have it somewhere. I have it saved in my. I don't even know where I put my phone. Maybe I left it. Oh no, it's here. I have it saved in my favorites. This
that graph.
That graph of this. Yeah, I
all I have to say is that graph, and our producer will remember to put it on the screen. He knows exactly what we're talking about.
All right, no, but I mean, I have it. I have it right here somewhere. They changed the way you do pictures now. I can't find it, but it's. I'm so boomer. They I have it saved where it's just there is no constituency for libertarianism, and this is a huge problem, because the libertarian. There it is. So the libertarians have to understand. So this is the Trump vote. This is the 2016 electorate, right?
Pointed at that camera right there. That one.
Right there. And I have it saved in my favorites.
Yeah.
That's just every once in a while, I have to bring this up. So libertarian, that is here in this quadrant, which is empty.
Yeah.
Okay. It's completely empty. So in order to have a viable political movement, you need to have voters. And in our system, of course, you need those voters to be distributed across things we call swing states. And in order to win those swing states, you have to win the presidency, and you have to win the voters to enable yourself to be able to win the presidency. This is why, and I'm sorry, but when those voters in Michigan, and I've been there at those rallies in Michigan, in Western Pennsylvania, and in Wisconsin, and when they hear electric vehicle, they just equate that with China.
Yeah.
Right. They say, well, that means China, because China's going to build those. China's going to put those plants in. That's all China. That's not us. And they're not wrong. They're not wrong.
There's no appetite in any of these swing states for infinity immigration in a country run by tech oligarchs.
Oh, and then you hear
like everything that they hate.
You hear mass immigration. You hear your mass immigration. You're going to cut public spending. You're going to cut public programs. You're going to move jobs away, because so many of them have seen it. They've seen it and lived it for the last 30, 40 years. As their towns have been destroyed, J.D. Vance wrote a whole book about it. Yeah. That it has completely decimated their communities, and what these people are doing is they don't want to live in some automated tech futuristic, with mass immigration from the third world running in, and they can look at New York City and see what's going on there, and everyone's voting for the Zoltan. I call him the Zoltan. They're voting, Zoltan Mandami. And suddenly this is going to be the mayor of New York City. Like the guy can't even use a fork and knife. And he's like eating, and not only that, but eating open food, messy food on the subway, which is a complete destruction of the social contract, by the way.
And also eating rice with his fingers.
Well, and yeah, that's what I'm saying. Eating rice with his fingers. But
So
to do so, he has another video, which I think is worse though, because he's doing it on the subway.
Oh, really?
Right. And so it's like, this is why, and when I go and, I'm Polish background, you can go to Poland and guess what? The subways aren't like that.
Yeah.
They're quiet. There might be some classical music. People are reading actual physical books. And nobody bothers you. Nobody's like messing around. If you
nobody's like ODing,
nobody's ODing, nobody's dying, nobody's getting set on fire.
Yeah.
And you when it's your stop, people say, "Oh, this is your stop. Here, let me let you walk by." Meanwhile, I've also spent time living in China, and it's not like that at all. In China, when you're on the subway or the bus or just anything with mass transit, you need to learn a very sophisticated survival technique, which I refer to as the elbow. And the elbow means, and here's how I learned this. In China, if you do not use the elbow will be used on you. And so you got to get in there first, or else you might not make it on that bus. Or you've got to get to, I'm like, I got to get to work. And those guys check when I sign in. I was at the Chamber of Commerce, and I worked in a foreign business firm, like trying to help U.S. companies get in there. Talk about Chinese tariffs on U.S. businesses, by the way. We had Hershey's as a client, Pennsylvania. We had a number of places, and one of the things I learned was that they don't do lines and oh hey, this bus is full, and if you're getting on, you better, and it doesn't matter who you are, and they don't care if you're some Lao Wai, foreigner, white guy, whatever. That's survival of the fittest very quickly.
Right.
And
who has the sharpest elbows? And that's just you could say it's their culture. You could say it's their civil, whatever, right? I just don't want to live in a place like that. I don't want my kids to have to live like that. As simple as that. Yeah. I'm totally fine with having, the tech right as a part of the coalition or whatever, with the understanding.
I think we have to call them the tech bros.
Bros.
I don't know if I call them tech right anymore.
My point is, that.
And I'm friends with a lot of these guys.
Yeah, totally. I think they can be a part of it with the understanding that the number one issue we are facing in our time is mass migration. And if you are not on board with that, I don't really think it's possible to be a part of it.
It's beyond that too, because this is a foundational issue of MAGA. Yeah. Right. So it's a foundational issue of MAGA in the sense that when Donald Trump came down the golden escalator, this is what he talked about. This is why we have the Trump movement. This is why we have America First. This is why Jeb Bush didn't win. This is why the Bush dynasty was slayed. And by the way, they weren't just slayed because of mass immigration, which obviously came up. And he certainly pointed that out with Jeb Bush quite a bit with the guac bowls and talked about his wife. And I mean, he went hard in the paint.
Yeah.
He was very, very clear about this. He also pointed out that it was the Bush family's massive failures in these overseas wars of adventure that you all said was going to be a great idea when we're going to Iraq and we're doing Afghanistan for 20 years and all this nation building nonsense. And it was Donald Trump was the first Republican, or at least person on a Republican stage, to come out and just say it and sort of let all of the conservative movement and the Republicans just sort of breathe a breath of fresh air and a breath of relief to say, I'm sick of having to defend that crap. Yeah. I'm sick of having to, hold up the Bush family as if this was some paragon of American virtue when they just weren't.
But wait a minute. Mark Levin told me going to war with Iran was America first.
What's funny about Mark, the funniest thing is that, so I'm from Norristown, PA. He's from Cheltenham, PA, which is like, I don't know, 20 minutes away from me. Yeah. And funny enough, that's where Bibi also went to high school. Bibi Netanyahu went to Cheltenham High, the same place where Mark went to high. Not at the same time. I think Bibi was a couple of years ahead of him. And I don't know that they knew each other, but they did go to the same high school. And
that's very interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's just like a random fact that I just happen to know from growing up in the area, that you just would always hear, like Bibi Netanyahu, who went to Cheltenham High, because I guess his dad worked in Philadelphia at the time. And that Mark Levin was, and he mentions it sometimes when I'd be listening to his radio show. And anyway, it's like, Mark, we're from very much the same area. Nobody around here talks like that, man. Yeah. Just nobody around here has that voice where he's so shrill and so loud. And I guess that works on radio. It's a good radio voice. I just don't know if it really works on television, podcast, long form.
Well, he talks about Iran more than he talks about America. Like I'm totally confused about like what an American political commentator is doing talking about Iran nonstop and like doing regime change in Iran and going to war with Iran. Like,
well, look, we have
what
threats.
does he really care about?
Well, look, we have threats. Like we have
Yeah.
adversaries, of course. You know, I mean, and if you'd like to switch to Mandarin, I'd be more than happy to have this conversation in Mandarin.
Don't
you
know
know,
any Mandarin.
然后我告诉你，他们都是。But you know, it's the issue is how do you deal with those threats, right? And how do you deal with potential threats to yourself and to your livelihood? And the fact that Iran, you know, I remember this one point people were talking about the Iran threat all of a sudden, and they were saying, oh, you know, it's this huge threat, and if they get nukes, what's going to happen? I said, well, yeah, okay, that could be a threat for sure. But then as you know, I kind of put my military hat on and I say, well, you know, first of all, they'd have to be able to deliver those nukes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they don't have ICBM. So they don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles in Iran. So they don't have an ability to actually hit the United States. So even if they did build a warhead, which we have no intelligence of at all that they were doing that, you know, they were certainly enriching uranium, no question about it, obviously. And you know, you can I would say, you know, you could obviously cause for alarm, sure, absolutely, but you know, contextualize it and understand how important that is. That's not the same thing as saying they have a warhead, it's nuclear. They've got MIRVs on this thing. It's on an intercontinental ballistic missile. They can hit they can hit New York and LA and San Francisco and all the rest of it. They just didn't have any of those things. And but from the same vein, by the way, you know who does have all those things? Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un also has submarine launch capability for his ballistic missiles, which means that even if you take out Pyongyang, those submarines are out there serving the same exact purpose that our Ohio-class subs and our nuclear subs, which have the ability to launch second strike capability. So if you take out Washington, or same thing that Russia uses, Moscow, China, Beijing, et cetera, that a submarine is going to be able to hit you back, even if you take out the leadership. That's the whole part they play of the nuclear triad. You know, famously, of course, we spend more on our bombers. Russia spends more on their missiles and subs. So it's, you know, it's different versions of it. But, you know, Kim Jong-un has this and certainly is a threat to Japan. But, you know, last time I checked, we never bombed North Korea. We never, you know, went out. No, you know, President Trump instead very famously and extremely successfully held a series of meetings with Kim Jong-un and was the only president in American history to have the courage and bravery to walk across the demilitarized zone with no guards, with no Secret Service. Now, you know, he's got snipers. But in the picture, he's there by himself. Yeah. He's there by himself, walking across that line with Kim Jong-un. And I've always said I think that's one of the bravest things I've ever seen a president do in my entire life. I mean, you remember Barack Obama with the binoculars, like, oh, look at those guys over there. You know, it's ridiculous. It's just silly.
You would never do that.
It's just so silly. And I, you know, actually, I did spend a deployment at Guantanamo, doing you know, counterterrorism for 1 year. And so, you know, you're right across from the Cubans, and you know, there's a mix of the whole area around there. My mind goes to that because it's all landmines around the base, because obviously we don't have a status of force agreement with Cuba for a lot of reasons. And they would always say, like, hey, if you guys go hiking or if you go too far up this river, like, you're going to be in Cuban territory and they can do all sorts of things to you that you know, it's going to be bad. It's going to be an international incident. So to see the president see Trump just walking, it was fantastic. It was amazing. And so my question to like Levin, who's attacked me personally about some of this stuff and others is, you know, President Trump has shown that he has the ability to deal with these things in ways that no one else has. He has this incredible power. He is the art of the deal. He's the deal maker in chief. And it just seems strange to me that when Levin said, you're not allowed to have any more meetings with the Iranian leadership.
Sorry, who are you?
You don't get to say that. Like, Donald Trump is the one who I voted for. And I know a lot of people that voted for that guy, as a matter of fact, 3 times, as a matter of fact. And by the way, we're from Pennsylvania, little bit of an important state, just saying. Yeah. 19 electoral votes, swing state, just saying. Reason Josh Shapiro hates my guts. That this is an issue that I think that we should let Donald Trump take care of and not try to force his hand in any way.
Yeah. One, it seems like to me the only people that are unhappy with the strikes on Fordo are the neocon warmongers that didn't get like a full ground invasion of Iran out of it.
Well, they wanted it, and they were, and certainly, you know, anyone who's plugged in knows that that's what so many of these people were calling for. They wanted full on, and people, you know, I think there's a lot of, you know, hide the football going on right now, where they say, oh, well, we got the strikes and Trump did it, and so, well, of course, it's the U.S. Air Force. Of course, they're going to be able to.
Yeah.
I mean, these things could, you know, they could blow up a nickel on the other side of the planet, or even on another planet if they wanted to. Of course, there's no question. The point is, that's not what these guys were calling for. They wanted full-on regime change. And you saw senators calling for this. And you saw Mark Levin, of course, strenuously calling for another one of these wars, very similar to what we saw in Iraq, similar to what we saw in Afghanistan, or, my gosh, the horrors of the Syrian civil war and all the Christians who were slaughtered there, and the regime change in Libya. By the way, the regime change in Ukraine, which we were obviously behind,
Right.
which, you know, look how that turned out a decade later. And, you know, it's this huge war. And so none of these regime changes go well because of the chaos. And President Trump, I think, rightly called this out. And so what I had been saying was that I called it the regime change upsell. And what they were doing was, and it's interesting, the Washington Post actually like caught the term, and that we had been using it. I was saying it on War Room and others. Said, well, what they're doing is the regime change upsell. It's like they get you in the door by saying, oh, it's just about the nuclear program, or take out the nuclear. Okay, yeah. Nobody likes the nuclear program. Take out the nuclear program. But while you're here,
You might as well.
it's like a used car salesman.
Yeah.
It's like this used car salesman tactic. It's like, you know the movie Fargo, when the guy, and he's the used car salesman. He's like, now you're gonna want that rust coating, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna want that rust coating. No, we don't want the rust coating. We want the rust coating. Well, the thing is, they put on the rust coating at the factory. So, I mean, I gotta charge you for it because it's already there. And they're like, you're a liar.
Yeah.
You lied to me. You know, and that's what Levin, and I think a lot of these guys, Lindsey Graham and others were doing. They were trying to upsell and say, okay, well, you've already bought off and signed off on the strikes, but now we're going to go in for the regime change. And they were doing this again and again and again. And President Trump, I think, rightly said, this isn't in our interest. And you look at the discourse too, that where were we prior to all that? It was mass riots in Los Angeles that were spreading out to other cities over deportations and this was, everyone was on board with this. Everyone was united. There was no divide. And when, you know, people have wanted to, you know, Levin, of course, is like twisted things that I've said. And I said, well, wait a minute. When I'm talking about division, I'm saying that we are so focused right now, and the movement is so focused, and everyone is behind these deportations, that I say just pedal to the metal on that, keep going. And if the libs are mad about it, good. Let them be mad.
Yeah. No, I think that's 100% right. What do you think about the president's second term versus the first term? What do you think is different? What do you think is better, improved?
Well, I think personnel wise, night and day.
Yeah.
Steve Bannon notwithstanding, since we were chatting about him, but no, it's a place where I think the president now understands the levers of power in ways that he didn't before. I think that prior to 2017 coming in, and is that you get there and you think, hey, I'm the president now, and everything that exists in DC that's underneath the president's purview, executive branch, civics 101 is, all of you guys work for me now, so I'm going to give an order and you guys are going to follow it, and there you go. And of course, that's not what we saw in the first administration at all. You had the FBI director going into business for himself. You had the entire intelligence community turning on the president, and you had just so many of this cavalcade of national security advisors after Flynn, right? So if they target Flynn, they get him out in the first place. Then you put in it goes McMaster, and then eventually Bolton, and they're all just lying to him and pushing for more of these wars constantly. And I think it's a situation where even I, prior Navy intelligence officer, but I didn't understand until I was in it that the intelligence community sort of operates as a fourth branch of government. And it's completely unelected. It is not even a little bit accountable. Supreme Court's, I guess, like accountable for a time, but then they become non-accountable after you elect them. Although Amy Coney Barrett she has corrected herself on a number of positions lately, and so she's done well. So I'm she's currently in my good graces. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But I'm keeping my eye on her.
Yeah. No
And
panicins.
No
We're
panicins.
winning.
No panicins.
Steve, we're winning.
No, we're all winning. No, we're all winning. We're all winning. But it's this intelligence community that has operated as, and the deep state writ large too. It's not just them, but that I think that's the most obvious one, that has operated as this fourth branch of government, particularly since they've grown since World War II. And I could go on for hours about this. Why do we have 17 intelligence agencies? Why? For what? And by the way, and for people who are like, oh, Posobiec doesn't know what he's talking about. No. I've been inside every single 3-letter agency in this town, every single one of them. I visited them. I've met them. You don't need 17 agencies. There are better ways. And I'll tell you why the reason they do that. They do that because they have power through their compartment, right? Because the compartmentalization creates silos, and compartmentalization means that you can then have power through becoming a broker of that information.
Yeah.
This is why they I'm just gonna say it, there are a lot of people in this town who hate DNI Tulsi Gabbard, and they want to get rid of her because what is she actually doing? She's just trying to do the actual job of a DNI and streamline the intelligence sharing process, getting rid of remember the firewall, like the post 9/11, and even like Janet Reno and others were talking about the firewall, and they say, well, no one's sharing information because they don't want to, because by keeping information consolidated, then they can say, all right, well, we have this report that says Trump is a Russian asset. Is it true? Like, probably not. But what we'll do is we'll leak that to SSCI, or I guess HIPSI at the time, and get Adam Schiff over there. And then Schiff will come out of the skiff and say, oh my gosh, guys, Trump is a Russian agent, and that creates this massive response. And so you can see it happening again and again. But then the other intelligence agencies or folks who have access to these other silos of information, because they can't see that report, they can't refute it.
Yeah.
Right. So it gives them power then over the political process, over the elected officials like President Trump or the actual congressional leaders themselves, because you're sitting there, oh gosh, I don't want someone to leak something like that about me because now my life's going to be ruined. And by the way, who gets to be the heads of these agencies? Well, you've got to be confirmed by all those people who are on HIPSI and SSCI, the Senate Select Committee, who are all working hand in glove with the intelligence community. So they have sort of operated as they've created a new branch out of nothingness. And so in many ways, kind of get back to your question, this has been it was completely unanswered, I think, in the previous Trump administration until maybe like the very end. And it created massive the Vindmans and impeachments and Mueller and all of this stuff. And so what I see as the best responses to that is getting somebody like a Gabbard and a Joe Kent and having Ratcliffe at CIA, obviously Cash over at FBI, and saying, we're going to tamp down on all of this nonsense right now. And then boom, we're going to just completely unleash Stephen Miller and Tom Homan, put Pam Bondi online now on the law enforcement side to act. So we're going to keep you all at bay and then allow the actual main quest items to be driven all the way to where they were actually supposed to be in the first term.
Well, here's the thing that's really amazing to me, thinking about how much the Overton window has shifted. Like, we didn't do mass deportations in term one.
No, it's just a wall.
Yeah. And now we're like, Trump talked about it on the campaign trail, like 15, 16.
You know what? You know what one of my biggest regrets is? I was at the RNC when they had the mass deportation now signs, and I didn't get one.
You post the picture all the time.
I post it all the time, but I didn't actually get one because the section I was in, they didn't get handed out. And it's like, all those people have one, and all those people, and I'm asking people and nobody would give me one. And they all took them out. And I'm like, gosh, I really wanted one of those signs. And they never did them since then.
Yeah. Well, if anyone on the campaign is listening and has an extra one, please get it to me. I will get it to Jack.
See, I could ask, but there's something about collectibles, and this is like, I don't know, I guess growing up in the Philly area, it's like the hunt is actually more. Yeah, sure, I could just ask, but I want to ask. No, I gotta try to find one.
Yeah,
I'm gonna try to find one.
Yeah, no, it's
Try at eBay. They're not there.
And you brought up ACB a few minutes ago. We had this big Supreme Court decision. What was that? Late last week or earlier this week? I don't remember. But basically putting a halt to all the nationwide injunctions Are we going to get more mass deportations now, you think?
I think we are. And I think that decision, and people, myself included, you sort of understand that this will come back to bite us, by the way, when a Democrat becomes president. It just will. But in the long-term trajectory of it is going to be fantastic, because it's taking a little bit of power away from the unelected judiciary and giving it back to the executive. And that means and this was, okay, so because this is how all this works, right? It's will the executive be allowed to effectively wield his power if that executive is a conservative, right? And that's what we're all talking about here. So why is it that 10 years after President Trump comes down the escalator, we're still talking about the deportation? And for a variety of reasons. You have the intelligence community, the judiciary, they're just not allowing it. And so, yes, we are, because what I think is finally being done now is the executive is getting its feedback under it and understanding. And this is something that the vice president understands. It's something the president obviously has shown all of us through his actions and his words, is that the only way that you can win is by wielding power. And, to all my libertarian buddies, it's you can't win by saying we won't wield power. And, this I call it the conservatarianism that sort of infected so much of the right. And a lot of this was in the Tea Party. And this was something a lot of people have had to sort of update themselves on. And I said something at NatCon last year that a lot of people just blew up, heads blown up over. A lot of the, like these types, the bulwark types, are going after me in the dispatch. And I said, having power without principles is tyranny, but having principles without power is delusion. It's delusional.
Yeah.
Right. So you're delusional. And this gets back to the graph that I was showing, that was, well, I'm so principled and I'm so principled. Okay, but you have no leverage. You have no power. You have no ability to actually wield your power. And so you can talk about your principles or how righteous you are until you're blue in the face. But in the end of the day, you will be steamrolled by people who understand how to effectively get power. And you go look at Zoltan Mamdani, and yeah, he's eating rice with his fingers in New York City, but through mass immigration, right? So through the power of mass immigration, through the disillusionment and nihilism of Gen Z, and the theater kid liberals, he's able to cobble together a constituency where he can actually be elected to be the mayor of our greatest city in our country by putting all of these forces together. And he understands that this is absolutely politically viable. Why? Because he's just targeting that bottom left corner of the map and just trying to run up the score as much as he can. And he understands that mass immigration has changed the demographics of New York, particularly South Asian and Middle Eastern immigration, which has tripled in New York just in the last 20 years, tripled in population. And just skyrocketed.
In 20 years?
In 20, 25 years, yeah. Since 2000, since 9/11, right? Yeah. Since 9/11 has tripled. And so, people are saying, how could this happen? I said, well, it's just numbers. It's just numbers. If you just look at the numbers, it's right there. And so people will point out, and I saw people were kind of disagreeing with me, and they were saying, well, wait a minute, blacks and Hispanics typically broke for Cuomo. And I said, I was like, you guys don't get it. He won South Asians 80-20. So that means if you can win this supermajority here of 80%, that blacks and Hispanics in terms of voting blocks aren't as strong as they once were and don't have as much leverage as they once did. They say, well, okay, well, that's just New York City. But New York City is a leading indicator, and it always has been. So those trends are going to continue throughout the country. So this is where it comes down to. And we talk about this in the book. We talked about this in Unhumans, Secret History of Communist Revolutions and How to Crush Them. Jack Posobiec and Joshua Lysek came out a year ago. And we said, look, it's going to go in two directions. You've got the populist right, which is MAGA, America First, populist nationalism, and you've got the populist left, which is Luigi Maggioni, Thomas Matthew Crooks, Zoltan Mamdani, and think about Luigi and Zoran Mamdani, right? Well, that's just your Bolsheviks and your Mensheviks,
yeah,
right? Because one's the guy who said, well, I'm pursuing the elected route of politics, where I'm just going to vote to take away everyone's stuff. And then you got Luigi Maggioni, same city, right? Same city. Right. And hey, let's just kill all the landlords and CEOs in the street. And guess what? The exact same forces are supporting both of them.
Yeah. think that's 100% right. Jack, where can people find you? Keep up with all the exciting stuff that you're doing. Watch the show. What's your promo code? Don't give me Tanya's.
No, there's no promo code. So actually, they had to discontinue promo code Tanya. The pillows were so bad, and there were so many complaints that actually, I'm sorry, just completely discontinued.
Wow. Unreal. Pass along my condolences.
According to me. Yeah, mypillow.com, promo code POSO, if you need the greatest night's sleep in the whole wide world. And then of course, you want to check me out. It's Human Events Daily. We're up every day. It's 2 p.m. So it's this block of populist nationalism on Real America's Voice. It goes Steve Bannon's War Room, Charlie Kirk's show, and then boom, you get hit with Human Events. So it's all right there. And then Steve comes back again.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Episode 200. This was amazing.
We did it.
Thanks for joining another fantastic episode of Moment of Truth. I don't really need to tell you where to go follow Jack Posobiec. You all know who he is. I'm pretty sure you all follow him on x.com. However, you should buy his book on humans. He referenced it a couple of times in this episode. It's great. I have a signed copy of it. So it's a very exciting book, very interesting about how to defeat the communists, which we definitely have to do. So thank you very much to Jack for coming on the show. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Moment of Truth, and we will see you again next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier and Hunter Smith, with original graphics and title cards by Jared Cummings. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.